Welcome back, readers, to Upon Reread. So, small hiccup. The release of the last book of the prequel, Born of Blood and Ash, has been pushed from May to August, and is reportedly 300k words, making it more than a third longer than any other book in this series. I'm adjusting my timeline on this, give myself a little more time. So I thought we'd jump into the prophecy and fill out the thesis for this series. But first, 3 days after posting the first video in the compendium, Visions of Flesh and Blood was released, confirming my suspicions about the star being an ancient that was dug up and not a created diamond. Half point for figuring out the part that was probably pretty obvious. So the prophecy, what it says, what we are expected to believe, and what lies in between. Prophecy is a fantasy staple, and also one of the pieces that needs to be handled with care. Introduced too early, and it feels like the characters are being railroaded and lack agency. Too late, and why have it at all? Too on the nose, and you give away the game. Too obscure, and it feels like the author is playing keep away at the reader's expense. A good prophecy should be like a mystery novel, giving the readers all the clues they need while sprinkling in a few red herrings that lead them astray, but should make perfect sense after the reveal, and never have information known only to the author. Take the first line of this series' prophecy as an example. From desperation of golden crowns and born of mortal flesh. We have an entire book called The Crown of Gilded Bones. Poppy is born mortal, and she and Castile are certainly desperate at that point. And if you're reading in the recommended order, you wouldn't have met Serafina. It would be understandable to think the prophecy is just about Poppy and Castile. I certainly did. So how is the story lying to us? For the most part, Visions exist to compile the high points of the series before going into the finale. It is also, quote, written, unquote, by Miss Willa, a seer with a minor role in the story, and a diary that is a bit of a running gag. The whole book is framed as a record of her visions, and if you read carefully, you'll notice that she hedges a lot around the parts of the story that are unknown, often with phrases like, "My visions haven't been clear," or "I have had to revise with this as new visions come in," or even, "I haven't seen anything about this yet." Preceding the prophecy, she says this. Gods, what can I say about the prophecy? It has changed more than I have taken new bed partners. But then again, has it? What has changed is the interpretation of what was prophesied by on the bones of Penelope, Bellefort's namesake, a goddess of divination, and it is still changing even now. She then gives us what she thinks the prophecy means, which falls neatly in line with what the characters think, what the author wants us to think at this point in the story. After the prophecy, she has left a note to self. Make sure to update these records as pieces become clear or visions manifest. Visions of Flesh and Blood is not a book for big reveals. So let's go through it. What we are told, and where it appears to be deliberately obscured. The first paragraph is pretty straightforward and deals with Serafina and Niktos. From desperation of golden crowns and born of mortal flesh, a great primal power rises as the heir to the lands and seas, the skies and all the realms. This is about the deal made to stop the rot, which ultimately leads to Syrah's birth and her ascent to true primal of life. Though, all primals, including Kalis, are born mortal. A shadow in the ember, a light in the flame, to become a fire in the flesh. Niktos, Syrah, and Poppy, respectively. At least at this point. For the one born of the blood and the ash, the bearer of 2 crowns, and the bringer of life to mortal, god, and Draken. Syrah again, born with the Ember of Life in her blood and descended by Niktos, aka Ash, aka Death, crowned consort of the Shadowlands, and true primal of life and queen of the gods. Kalos even puts her in a position to revive a mortal, a god, and a Draken. Also, when Poppy meets Niktos, he tells her she is owed more than one crown. A silver beast with blood seeping from its jaws of fire. Niktos, who can turn into a silver-white wolf, bathed in the flames of the brightest moon to ever be birthed. One of the titles Niktos gives Syrah is the brightest moon, and claims it's a reference to her hair color. We'll become one. They got busy. Interestingly, this little piece was misinterpreted by the Oracle Delphi in the story. He thought it would mean Niktos would have to kill Syrah and become the singular power, the primal of life, or possibly blood and bone. The next part is about the war gearing up in the final book, Fire and Flesh, Born of Blood and Ash. This is also the paragraph with the fewest notes from Miss Willa. What is unsaid can be as interesting as what is. When the stars fall from the night, and the great mountains crumble into the seas, and the old bones raise their swords beside the gods. In the main series, Poppy sees a vision of Syrah raising an army of bone soldiers wielding swords. And most of the people on Syrah's side of the conflict are God, while Kalos holds most of the primals. The false one will be stripped from glory as the great powers will stumble and fall. The false one is obviously the false primal of life, Kalos. The great powers, though Willa doesn't say it, are the primals, because who else qualifies as the great powers in a war of primals and gods? Also of note, when Kalos gives his version of the prophecy, he changes as to until, and then omits the rest of the paragraph. But we'll cover the true primal of inferiority complexes when we get to him. Some all at once, and they will fall through the fires into a void of nothing. Hell in this world is known as the Abyss, and is where the evil souls burn. It seems self-evident, but what exactly happens to the souls of dead primals isn't clear. Though Niktos has sent gods to the Abyss, and primals are just supercharged gods. Those left standing will tremble as they kneel, will weaken as they become small, as they become forgotten. What was that wonderful line from Castile after Poppy became queen? You will bow before her, or you will bleed before her. I suspect Niktos' feelings aren't so different. Specifically, I think this line refers to Atez and Kin. In both series, the power of War and Accord and Peace and Vengeance are held by twins. It's probable that their lives are also linked. Atez is an ally of Syrah, but Kin is in Kalos' camp. So Kin is unlikely to be killed, since in the War of Two Queens, Nactus implies that Atez is still alive. In Poppy and Castile's time, it is believed there is only one primal. Primal of life and death, Niktos. The others, despite having similar titles to the primals of Syrah's time, are listed as gods. If you've read all the books up until this point, you know that Niktos did not become life and death, and Bel has already ascended to primal with the death of Hanan. So any primals that survive the war will likely be stripped of their true primal status and have those handed over to Syrah and Niktos' people. Being the true primal of life, unlike Kalos, she can ascend gods to primals. What happens to primals not dead but stripped of their power remains to be seen. For finally the primal rises, the giver of blood and the bringer of bone. the primal of blood and ash. Willa says this is Niktos and Sarah again. Possible. But the final paragraph is where Poppy comes in, so it could be referring to her. She is the primal of blood and bone. Here's where my disagreement with the provided interpretation begins, and it largely deals with what will happen in the finale of From Blood and Ash. Two born of the same misdeeds, born of the same great and primal power in the mortal realm. Willa says this is the capture of Iris at Jadis by Elizabeth, and the subsequent non-consensual conception of Millicent and Poppy are the misdeeds in question. When I say a good prophecy needs red herrings, this is what I'm talking about. Millicent is Poppy's older sister, and Elizabeth's first attempt to create a primal of blood and bone. She fits very neatly into the wording, but is otherwise a small part of the story. I suspect the misdeeds are those of Collis, his theft of the embers of life, and pulling Satoria's soul from the veil, acts that ultimately brought about Seraphina and Poppy. A first daughter, with blood full of fire, fated for the once promised king. Willa says this is Millicent and Malik, respectively. I disagree. Millie is a failed second daughter. If you've only read From Blood and Ash, they are obvious fits. Malik is the firstborn prince and future king of Atlantia, and Millicent is his heartmate. Until Poppy marries Castile, he should have been king. But there's another once promised king, Niktos. He's the son of Ethos, true primal of life, and because of what Collis did, he was born with both the embers of life and death. He should have been the primal of blood and bone, king of the gods. Of all the mysteries in this series, why Ethos did what he did is probably the lowest hanging fruit. He wanted to save the realms from Collis's pride. Moreover, he wanted his son to live. Collis had stolen his embers, taken his throne, and murdered his wife. Niktos was all he had left. But there was no way Collis would have let Niktos go through his culling and overthrow him, maybe even force him back into being just the primal of death. Not when he could kill the kid, take his embers, and become primal of blood and bone, undisputed king in his own right. So Ethos took the embers of life, leaving Niktos the less threatening primal of death, not even the true primal, since that title still belongs to Collis. He would be less, his fate denied, but he would live. Ethos made a deal for the first daughter of the Muriel bloodline, to be the consort of death. That's Sarah, born from the embers of life, the fire of the gods in her veins. And the second daughter, with blood full of ash and ice, the other half of the future king. Willa and I agree that this is Poppy and Castile. But I will point out, but until Millicent died, she also fit this description. She would have had the same powers as Poppy, more or less, and was heartmate to Malik, future king of Atlantia. And we can look at Elizabeth here for evidence, and her treatment of both Castile and Malik. Castile was the spare. She really had no use for him, but as revenge against Eleonora and to build her army. But Malik, she took the time to win to her side. Somehow. She even planned to force Poppy to marry him, fulfilling the prophecy to the letter, but not the spirit. Together they will remake the realms as they usher in the end. After Poppy is crowned, and she and Castile have their first council meeting, she takes a moment to speak to Miss Willa, who tells her that she is one of two who will stand in the gap. At the time, the obvious answer was Castile would be the other, but neither Sarah nor Millie had been introduced. Following the reading order, The next book starts with Sierra's 4-book prequel arc to Primal of Life. Until Poppy wakes as Blood and Bone, Sierra is the most powerful person in the series. Millie, by contrast, is only in a handful of scenes and will only get a single book to round out her story after the Primal of Blood and Bone. That is really late in the game to make her super important to the final battle. As a character, she's fine, but she really doesn't have the skin in the game, not in the way Poppy and Serafina do. She's an exceptional Reverend, but she will never be a Primal, and not on the same level as Poppy, Serafina, Niktos, and Kalis. Also, the end here could be the end of an era. Kalis is the last of his generation. Poppy will be a new beginning as a Primal that has never existed before. And so it will begin, with the last chosen blood spilled. The great conspirator, birthed from the flesh and fire of the Primals, will awaken as the harbinger and the bringer of death and destruction to the lands gifted by the gods. Beware, for the end will come from the west to destroy the east, and lay waste to all which lie between. Short version, Kalis is gonna wake up grumpy and make it everyone's problem. There's another part to the prophecy. When Penelope, the goddess from Sierra's time, arrives with Holland to deliver the prophecy to Niktos and Sierra, she says she also has a visual component. But I saw her. I saw them. A chosen and a descendant of the first. A queen of flesh and fire. And him, a king risen from blood and ash, who ruled side by side with man. And they felt right. They felt like hope. Look at how this is visually structured. She is given top billing before them. The third sentence is most interesting. It could be referring to her only, or to them. Castile and Malik are direct descendants of Atez, who doesn't have the distinction of being the first anything. But Poppy and Millicent are descendants of Sierra, the first daughter of the Muriel line, the first queen of the gods. And the descendant of the first is automatically the second. The main thesis for this series is that the Fates are building a new ancient. They can't predict the future, but they can see the possibilities, and the threads of fate change based on what people choose. The Fates are a bit of a who watches the watcher situation. They aren't allowed to interfere, but who gets to decide what interference is? They know of the prophecy sometime after Kalis uses the star to steal the embers, but before Ethos asks for advice to save his son. What did they know? What did they share? And what did they keep back? We don't know. Maybe never know for sure. You can't observe a thing without changing it. Holland was a presence in Serafina's life from a young age. He trained her, advised her, comforted her. Did he tell her, go here and do this? No. But he could have prepared her for possibilities and probabilities. Put her on a path to the desired outcome based on what he shared or didn't. The Fates could likely see that Isabeth's first attempt to fill the prophecy would fail. It was too heavy-handed. Neither Poppy nor Sierra ascended to Primal all at once. They both received blood several times before the full ascension, and both ascended by heartmates. Isabeth tried to ascend to Millicent herself, using blood from Castile, who she'd tortured and kept on the edge of starving for decades. Poor Millie never had a chance. Please join me next time as we dive into the book proper, starting with A Shadow in the Ember. And let me know how I can improve your shelf.